Chapter 23. Elizabeth had just finished feeding the barn animals when she saw Paxton ride in. She winced slightly as she saw the concern on his face. Earlier that day, Deputy Martin had come and explained the situation to them in full. She was aware of Justin Newton's disappearance and of Amelia Stanton's alleged involvement. Her husband's returning in evident distress made her think the worst. He dismounted, starting to remove the saddle and bridle. When he was finished that task, he took a brush and smoothed it along Castro's neck. "What happened?" Elizabeth asked, realizing that Paxton hadn't noticed her presence, which only intensified her anxiety.
"Oh, everything is all right. Turns out my suspicions were correct. Amelia had nothing to do with the boy's disappearance. Justin simply disobeyed his mother and got into trouble all on his own. Nothing too serious,"
he amended quickly, seeing Elizabeth's unease.
"His horse went out of control and ran into the desert. Justin fell off, broke a leg, and bumped his head too. He'll heal and be back to normal in no time."
The sun was flirting ostentatiously with the horizon, and its rays were peeking brazenly through the openings in the barn walls. One ray struck the back of Paxton's head and lit his hair with such vibrancy that it seemed like it was ablaze, almost like a halo. Castro whinnied as if the sight was quite humorous. "I'm glad to hear it," Elizabeth said, with a mild smile and a wink at the horse. "What about your sister? Any news of her?" He shook his head and stepped away from the light.
"Fenton wanted me to go in search of her. I refused."
He briefly explained the confrontation he had with his brother-in-law. "Are you hungry?" Elizabeth chose not to remark on the altercation Paxton had with Fenton. She was quite relieved Paxton, despite Fenton's threats, decided not to go in search of his sister. Trust was not in her vocabulary when it came to the Stantons, and it would have been difficult to say an indefinite goodbye to her husband.
"Famished,"
he replied, his stomach growling in agreement. "I'll heat up some leftover stew. I wasn't sure when you were coming back, so I didn't prepare anything prematurely." Elizabeth tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear and looked significantly at her husband. "Pax, are you sure you don't want to go look for Amelia? I'd feel horrible if you declined, just for my benefit." He wrapped his arms around her waist and kissed her cheek.
"Amelia is fine. I don't need to find her. She's quite capable of taking care of herself. I'm craving some of that stew of yours, now that you mentioned it, and some alone time with you, dearest."
Her face lit up, both figuratively and literally, when a sunbeam touched her. "I'd better get started." She hesitated. "One more question, Pax."
"Yes?"
"How come you never told anyone about Maxwell's attempt to murder you and force my hand in marriage?" The unexpected question startled him.
"Where is this coming from, Lizzie?" We haven't spoken about that in weeks. I hope you don't hold it against me. I was seriously considering telling the sheriff when Jack warned me not to. He said it would stir up a hornet's nest something fierce, since Scythe was Stanton's man. Jack envisioned an entire town divided between me and the mayor. He figured we could handle the situation ourselves without upsetting the town. He shrugged. I was torn myself, torn between empathizing with Maxwell's obsession with you, turning the other cheek, so to speak, and exacting retribution. A part of me really wanted revenge on the man who hurt you, manipulated us, and tried to kill me. And the other part just wanted to let it all go. I was debating the pros and cons of implicating Stanton when I discovered the connection between my sister and Maxwell. And then there were new conditions and limitations. I could still expose the mayor for what he is.
She nodded, having all the answer she required. Well, I guess I'd better go and heat up that stew. Elizabeth left the barn, and Paxton heard a gasp, as if something startling had happened. He stepped out from the barn into the orange light of the setting sun. Once his eyes adjusted, he saw the reason for the gasp, and the pit of his stomach clenched in response. Fenton Stanton stood just a pace away, his arm effectively pinning Elizabeth to him, and the barrel of his gun pointing directly at her head. Fenton's stature was calm. Only his eyes betrayed the desperate frenzy he was endeavoring to conceal. I will make this easy for you, Reign. Paxton had already assessed the situation and the ways he could react. His gun was in its holster, which hung on the gun belt around his waist, and even attempting to withdraw it might push Fenton over the precipice he was teetering on. It was clear to Paxton that his brother-in-law was edging insanity. He was desperate, and consequently very serious in his threat to shoot Elizabeth. Raising his hand cautiously in a gesture of peace, Paxton began, Fenton, let's not. The gun was cocked. I am running out of patience. All right. What do you want? It's really quite simple, Reign, and you know it. You know what I want. He tightened his grip on Elizabeth. Amelia, and my money. I need your help to find them. I will not live without my wife. You'll come with me now, or share my lonely fate and live without yours. Fenton meant what he said. Paxton vividly remembered his absolute anguish and despair when he'd been forced to think about living without his beloved before, and those were feelings he never wanted to face again. Although Fenton's expression of love was twisted and perhaps just a little wicked, he felt for Amelia as Paxton did for Elizabeth, and his current action compelled Paxton to realize it. You have my word that I'll help you find my sister. Elizabeth, feeling her captor physically relax, took the opportunity to elbow him forcefully in the ribs. Escaping his grasp, She wheeled around and slapped him in the face. "Next time, point the gun at your own head, you coward." Fenton coughed, squeezing his arms against his bruising ribs, and entirely distracted by the unforeseen onslaught. After several moments, both Reigns heard what sounded like a pained chuckle coming from the accosted man. Paxton, who'd drawn his gun mere seconds after Elizabeth's escape, holstered it again. He kept his hand close, though, just in case.
"She is definitely a match for you, Reign."
Fenton looked amused, and showed no hesitation in putting his gun away, now that he had what he wanted.
"I know I can trust your word, and there will be no trickery."
The statement required confirmation.
"Yes, of course. But I must add a stipulation."
Paxton took a protective stance in front of Elizabeth.
"I'll find Amelia, but after that, you're on your own. Convincing her to stay with you and to return your money is strictly your job. That is none of my business."
"Agreed." Paxton glanced at Elizabeth, resisting his emotions.
"I suppose I'd better pack."
"I'll heat you." Her brilliant eyes fell upon Fenton and narrowed, but her voice was hospitable. "Both some stew for the road."
Fenton smirked. "That would be greatly appreciated." "I suggest we leave at sunrise." "No. I want to go immediately after we eat. The sooner we find Amelia, the less money she'll have spent."
Paxton shook his head, fully aware that how much money Amelia would spend had little to do with Fenton's urgency.
"Something tells me, Fenton, that you'd much rather spend the night in a soft, warm bed as opposed to a blanket laid on rocky terrain, wild coyotes howling, and all manner of things crawling nearby as you attempt to sleep. Or were you planning to ride all through the night?"
Fenton grimaced.
"We spend the night here."
The sky was dusty gray, flecked with occasional puffs of cloud, as Paxton and Fenton wound their horses along the trail toward town. Paxton's thoughts were of Elizabeth, and the way she'd looked when he'd said goodbye. Both of them knew this parting, while probably lasting some duration, would not be forever. Searching for Amelia posed no real threat to his life, only inconvenience. As the trip progressed, Fenton, who was accustomed to fine carriages with padded seats, was distressed by the soreness of his muscles, particularly those